All right, guys. Today is a nice short video about a specific topic in Unit 5. Let me pull this up real quick. It is topic 5.16. You'll notice there's only like 4 slides for this one. So this is a nice, short, easy one, I think, to understand. So kind of expanding a little bit on what we talked about yesterday or in the previous lecture about overfishing. It's kind of a big problem. Again, kind of a tragedy of the commons type of issue. Um, now, aquaculture is real simple. It's basically just the farming of fish. On land we farm cattle and we raise chickens for poultry and all that type of stuff. But this is basically just farming fish or shellfish, or even aquatic plants. Anything that can be grown in the water essentially is what aquaculture is. But they're farming these things with the sole purpose of selling them to make profit. So for example, this picture here, these are aquaculture pens, and basically under the water, you don't see it, but they're basically big cages or big nets where they're growing, or farming some type of a fish in there. Um, Aquaculture can be done in saltwater, can also be done in freshwater environments. So it doesn't really have to be in one or the other. It's usually a fairly small operation. Like for example, this picture, there might be maybe 7 or 8 different pens. Sometimes they're much bigger operations. Sometimes they're indoors. Sometimes they're outdoors, like you see here in the picture. China is the world's leader in aquaculture. A lot of the fish that we get from around the world are actually raised in China, and they export them to other countries. All right, so I guess the question is, we have oceans, we have lakes and rivers and streams. So, like, why is there such a need for aquaculture? Part of that is, again, because of just the demand for food. Animal protein is something that we have to have. Whether or not we get it from beef or chicken, or we get it from fish. There is a increasing amount of people on this planet, and along with that is going to become an increased demand for animal protein. So the need for fish is becoming greater and greater every single year. Now, does it really matter? I mean, animal protein is animal protein. I don't care if you get your protein from fish or from chicken or from beef, but there actually is sort of a big difference when it comes to farming. We're going to talk this year, actually in a couple of weeks, actually next week, we're going to talk about farming cattle and farming poultry and the practices that are used. But farming those things utilizes a lot more resources. For example, farming fish, even though it's done in the water, it actually uses, the process of farming the fish uses a lot less fresh water compared to raising cattle or raising chickens. You might not know it, but there is a tremendous amount of fresh water that is used to raise those animals on land. We'll talk about it next week a little bit, but a lot of fresh water is used. Um, Land, you don't really use any land really, unless you're, I guess, maybe raising the fish on land, like in a pool or something. But I mean, raising cattle or raising chickens uses up much more land area than raising fish does. Also, fossil fuel use. There is some fossil fuel. I'm gonna go back to this picture real quick. This guy running his little boat, just kind of moving around in the water, maybe from pen to pen. Those boats are running on gasoline and oil. But in order to raise cattle or poultry, there's a lot more fossil fuel use compared to aquaculture. So that's kind of an interesting difference between the two, or set of differences between the two. Another reason why we have to farm fish is what we talked about in the last lecture. Our wild fish are just being depleted, right? I mean, we're overfishing our oceans, overfishing our lakes and rivers and streams. So there's more of a need to raise fish this way because fishermen just can't catch fish like they used to. The numbers just aren't there. And finally, I suppose there's an economic need for aquaculture. It just generates income for fishermen. Again, if these fishermen are having difficulties finding fish in the ocean, because they're being depleted, this allows fishermen an easy way to generate income for themselves, so that they have money to feed their family. It's also a lot less dangerous than open water fishing. If you ever watch those shows on like Discovery Channel, I can't remember the name. Deadliest Catch, I think, is one of them. There's people that like die on these like fishing boats and stuff. You know, Aquaculture is a little bit safer for the fishermen, I suppose, than open water fishing is. So those things alone, I suppose, give us a nice need for aquaculture. So what could possibly go wrong, right? I mean, it sounds so nice that we can just farm these fish, but there's actually a lot of unintended consequences that can occur from this. So it says here, like most animal farming methods, and again, we'll talk about some of these things next week, aquaculture results in a lot of animals being packed very tightly into very small areas. Again, I'll go back to these pictures here. I mean, here's an aquaculture pen. I mean, you got hundreds, maybe thousands of fish, in one small area. That probably wouldn't occur in the wild, right? Same thing here, right? In each one of these pens, there's probably several thousand fish all packed together, nice and tight. So some of the things that could go wrong, one is animal waste. You get a tremendous amount of animal waste that has to get dealt with. That usually leads to water pollution issues. Um, when you have a lot of animal waste, I don't care if it's fish or it comes from pigs or cattle or chickens, if it's in the water, it's going to lead to algae blooms, and that leads to eutrophication and hypoxic zones and all that type of stuff. So that all has to be managed, and it's very difficult to manage that in water if you're farming organisms in water. Uneaten fish food. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll overfeed these fish and the food doesn't get eaten. A lot of times that will lead to water contamination, and it'll result in similar things that we see up here in number one. It can lead to algae blooms and all that type of stuff. Um, Farmed fish can escape. Sometimes these fish can get out of their pens. I'm going to go back to this picture here. Let's say, for example, there's a hurricane or a storm, and these pens get flipped upside down, or the water gets whisked out of them, whatever, and fish escape. If that happens, that can lead to some of these fish that can go into local habitats. They may be invasive species. They can outcompete wild fish populations. That can be very problematic. So they have to be very careful to manage these aquaculture pens so that these animals don't escape and get into the wild and outcompete or even breed with some of the local fish populations. The final one is disease. When you get a lot of animals that are packed into one area, right? We're kind of reducing, or I should say, we're increasing the density of those organisms. That leads to a lot of spreading of diseases. So if there's a lot of disease in these aquaculture pens, if those animals do escape, they can spread those diseases into the wild. To combat this problem, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use a tremendous amount of antibiotics, chemicals that are used to keep the fish healthy. One problem with that is when we eat those fish, we get those antibiotics into our bodies. And there's actually a big problem with that, and we'll talk about it down the road. But you know, we don't intentionally want to get those antibiotics, but we actually get them into our bodies. It can actually cause health problems. Um, it can also lead to water pollution. If all these antibiotics, all these chemicals just get into the water, it can pollute the water that way. So these are all, again, they're kind of unintended consequences, but they are things that we have to kind of watch for. So I guess the moral of this is, aquaculture, kind of weighing it out, the pros and the cons, you know, do the pros outweigh the cons? Do the cons outweigh the pros? I don't know, but there is a demand for fish. So if we are, I guess, depleting our fisheries, I mean, I suppose that would probably be the answer. Let's just not deplete our wild fisheries, so maybe we wouldn't have to depend on aquaculture so much. But because of that reason and because of the demand for animal protein, these aquaculture farms are becoming more and more common. All right, guys, that's it for me for today. There's some homework on the agenda, so work on that for today, and I will see you soon. Take care, everybody.